myself up as a living sacrifice who is prepared to give my life for the sake of the gospel. I don't know if I should fight for my freedom or not fight so hard, to present the gospel, but not to fight so hard, so that ultimately I will be put to death for my faith. In that case, it would be, I don't know what I should choose. Choose to fight or choose not to fight and see what the outcome is. If we use the preference definition, then it's more in keeping with Romans 8:26, where he's talking about prayer. And he says, in the same way, the Spirit also helps us in our weakness, because we do not know what to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with unspoken groanings. So in that case, he's like, I don't know which one I should prefer, because there's wonderful things on both sides, and I don't know what I should do. Now, if we're talking about the first one, we're not talking about the same thing as like you hear on the news, suicide by cop, where somebody has a death wish, but they don't want to do it themselves. So they make it so a police officer has to shoot them. That's not what we're talking here. We are simply talking about the fact that Paul knows, he has been told by the Spirit of God that he has to go before the emperor. He has to proclaim the gospel. So I have absolutely no doubt, if this is the case, that Paul is going to give a defense of the gospel. But we are not told that he has to fight for his own acquittal. And so I think part of this debate would be, man, I don't know which is best for the glory of Christ. I don't know which I'm supposed to do. So both of these, I think, are possibilities. I tend to favor one over the other. I don't necessarily need to tell you which one, because this is not a hill on which I am prepared to die, because I'm not totally sure. But in either of those, the important thing is that he wants to glorify Christ. And he is not positive on how the trial is going to turn out, though he tells us he feels like he will prevail. But the emphasis here is really on his view of life and death and his priority of the gospel. He wants to live for Jesus. Whichever way he goes, it's Christ. One is going to mean much more suffering for him, and the other means joyously resting in the total liberation in the presence of Jesus. And if to live is Christ, and as John Calvin puts it, to die is Christ too, then one might think that death would be the better and logical choice. But Paul is not interested. If you know his priorities, he is not interested in which way is easy, but which way is best. And he says to stay and fight on and be able to minister was going to be better for the gospel among the Philistines, and he's prepared to be poured out as a drink offering for their sake and delay his glory, his day in glory, if that is what Christ wants. But it is all about what Christ wants. So as we go into this passage, break it down a little bit, I want us to ask ourselves these questions. Man, what is my view? What is my priority? What is my highest value? What do I want to see happen in my life daily? Am I prepared to live for Jesus? And am I prepared to die for Jesus? As we have sung this morning, is he my everything? Because if we're not prepared to live there, can we truly sing those words and mean them? I think it's okay for us to sing those words that we want to mean them, and we are in process, and that's okay. So I'm not here to beat anybody down if you're like, man, I'm not there. I'm not there. See, there's grace for you, and there's grace for me. But I do want to present what I think is what Scripture is telling us that is our ideal, is our goal, is our desire for us to both live and to die for the glory of Jesus. It's what we're called to in this life. It is why we're still here on this earth. To live for and die for our faith, that Christ will be glorified in our living and our dying. So we've already established over the last couple of weeks that for Paul, it is all about Christ. The gospel is his highest value. It is his greatest priority. It shapes and defines everything he is. When he talks Jesus. When he acts Jesus. When he does something for someone, he does it for the glory of Jesus. Everything seems to be exuding out of him Jesus. So what does that look like? What would that look like today? Well, I'm going to give you an illustration that I never in a million years thought I would ever give. Not positively, at least. But the thing that is throughout the news, all the talk shows, all the newspapers, everything that you see flying through social media is dealing with who? Yeah, say it again. Yeah, Kanye. Kanye West. I've got some fists up in the house. I never thought I would point out Kanye West in a positive note. And it's a strange illustration, I guess. It seems like it to me. And let me just say, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. If you don't even know the name Kanye West, I can't help you. If you can Google, go Google. Get somebody who's younger than you to Google for you. They'll come up and tell you everything that you need to know. But so I was saying, I don't know what's going to happen with Kanye. I don't know. I can't see into his heart. I can't know if what's going on is genuine. It certainly seems genuine to me. But it's been amazing to see how Christ now seems to define every part of his life. Man, if you listen to this guy, if he's in an interview, every interview goes to Jesus. His money, it seems to be focused on the gospel. And I mean, it just seems like everything is changing or has changed in his life, that every time I've heard him open his mouth over the last couple of weeks, it's been Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I mean, it's all Jesus. It seems to permeate everything about his life without shame, without worry of consequence. He's like, I don't care what you think about me, man. I work for God now. And again, I'm going to say, I don't know what the future will hold for him. I don't know. People have fallen away before. I can't say that. I'm not talking about what will happen. If this has been a transformation in his life, then it's something that will last. What I'm saying is, if you want to see what it looks like for somebody who looks all in, that's a pretty good example. That's what it looks like. And I say that because when I look at what I'm seeing in this man, it seems to be the evidence, the same kind of evidence we see in a transformation of somebody's life where they do a complete 180. And so I think about Paul, who did a complete 180. Can you imagine? Because I think, had we been back in the day of Paul and we heard this happen about that guy, we'd be saying the same stuff. Look, I don't know what this Paul guy is going to do because I know what he was. I know what he did. Because he didn't just talk bad about Christians, he had them killed. Okay, so let's not be too strongly opposed or skeptical about what God can do in somebody's lives, because I'm not here to throw stones. I'm here to say, you know what? I want that boldness. I want that kind of boldness. Do we have that kind of boldness? Because I'm going to tell you that I see more passion for Jesus than I see in a lot of us who have been believers for some time. And to me, as I think about that and reflect on this, it's very troubling. It's personally troubling. But that's what it's going to look like. It's the kind of boldness that Paul had, who says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. But whether I live or die, I want Christ to be honored. So in 22 through 24, he said, I live on in the flesh, or if I live on in the flesh, this means fruitful work for me. I don't know which one I should choose, or I don't know which one I should prefer. I'm torn between the two. I long to depart to be with Christ, which is far better, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. So given the premise of 21, for me to live as Christ, to die as gain, Paul reasons out where he stands, giving his current context and his current circumstance. His current circumstance was prison. The context is someone who's not sure if he's going to live or die, if he's going to survive prison or if he's going to die. He doesn't know what that's going to be. And so in 22, he essentially says, to live, if it's life, then it's fruitful work for the church. And that is necessary for the church's sake. That's the life part. I'm kind of deliberating through this. To live means fruitful work for Christ. It's necessary for the church. 23, he says, to die is to be in the glorious presence of Christ, and that is far better for me. And it's what I long for. It's my preference, you could say, if he had to. So in the first, it's fruitful work for Christ. The second is personal communion, face to face with Christ. The first is necessary for the church. The second is preferable for Paul. So he's dealing with what is good for the church and what is good for himself. He's dealing with what is necessary for the church and what is preferable and desirable and is far better for himself. And this is the issue that Paul is debating internally, it seems, and he does it out loud, and he does it for the benefit of us to listen in. And one of the things that I want to point out, just point out a few things of observations about this text. And one of the things is that we see an example of a healthy attitude of life and death for a believer. We get a healthy attitude. He's got a good balance, and that's where it starts. What do you believe? And I think this is what shapes it. What do you believe about this life and death based on your understanding of it? What is to be our view? We've talked a lot here about the fact that we are exiles, that we're not home yet, that this is temporary, that this is something that we in many ways endure, and yet we have this strange relationship with this life in this world. We like it, even though we know it's not home. So how do we have a healthy balance? What is our attitude of life and death based on our understanding of it? And the first thing that I would ask, because I think it's one of the things that's most common, is, do you fear it? Sometimes I may be saying, do you fear life? I get that. Sometimes we're afraid of life. It's like Monday morning we pull the covers up and we say, can we please just turn the lights out again? And so we may fear living, but quite often we fear death. We're just afraid to die. And so I want to have us think a little bit. Why is that? Because Paul did not express in any way fear of death. It wasn't an issue for him. It wasn't a problem. Do we have a misunderstanding of what heaven's like? Do we have a misunderstanding of what salvation is like? About what the promises are for the believer? And so I think about John chapter 14, where Jesus dealt with this with his apostles. And things were starting to happen. That Jesus was starting to point towards Calvary, where he was moving towards Jerusalem. In John 14, he was moving toward Golgotha, I should say. In John chapter 14, he's talking with his apostles. And in verses 1 through 3, he says this: don't let your heart be troubled. When we're talking about life, death, what's happening, what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to you, don't let your heart be troubled. And he tells them why. He says, believe in God, believe also in me. So that they had a belief in God. He was now God in the flesh. That was sort of a new concept. So believe in me. Put your trust in me. Verse 2, in my Father's house are many rooms, many places, many abiding places. If not, I would have told you. I'm going to prepare a place for you. If I go away and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. Now think about these apostles, because they had been with Jesus for almost 3 years at this point. They had traveled with him. They had been in close communion with him. They knew him. They grew to love him. They followed him. They wanted to please him. So there was this thing about Jesus that gives testimony to how glorious it is to be in his presence by the fact that his apostles, they wanted to know, what are you talking about? Where are you going? Why can't I go? Can we go? What's going on? And so, as it was their greatest desire and their desire to know what was going to happen and how can they be with him where he's going, it talked about, it speaks of their hope and their desire and their belief in Jesus. Is it that we don't have such an understanding of Jesus that we kind of look at it and go, I love Jesus, but man, I like where I am. The disciples, their focus was they want Jesus. So does it have to do with a misunderstanding and maybe a distance that we have in our relationship with Jesus? I'm not sure. It's something we need to ask those questions about. Sometimes it can be because we don't have a hope in Jesus. There certainly could be some people in here right now who, you're in church, you've been to church, you've heard about Jesus, but you don't have that kind of a hope where you go, I know what's going to happen to me after death. I know that when I die, my life continues because I have been given life through Jesus. And so there may not be that hope that you have. And for you, I would say, believe in Jesus. That's what he said. Those are his words. Don't let your heart be troubled. When you think about what's coming next, when you think about your life as you get older and the risks and the dangers of this life, man, what happens if I leave this place and I step off and get hit by a car, or somebody comes in and starts shooting, whatever it is that gives us fear, and our hearts are troubled over. Jesus says, don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in me. Believe in me. He continued in John 14, where he said, you know the way where I'm going. So he makes this statement about, look, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And oh, by the way, you know where I'm going. Which you might guess prompted one of them. In this case, it was doubting Thomas, who said, Lord, verse 5, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Okay, you just said, I'm going to my Father's house. We don't have a map for that. And they don't have an app for that. So we just don't know what you're talking about, that you're going and preparing a place. How do we know the way? And Jesus' response was interesting. He said, I'm the way. I'm the way, I'm the truth, and I'm the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. And he said, if you know me, you will also know my Father. From now on, you do know him, and you've seen him. So like, hey, Jesus, how do we know where to go? And Jesus says, just come to me. Just trust in me. You don't have to know anything beyond me, because I'll get you there. I'm going to take you in the presence of the Father. By the way, my Father. So you stick with me, because I'm preparing a place for you, and I'm coming. I'll get you, and we're going because you trust in me. That's how we can have this kind of a hope in Jesus, to be able to say, look, I don't know all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I can't lay out to you the blueprint of what heaven looks like specifically. I can't tell you what happens in that transitionary moment. I know that the Bible says in the twinkling of an eye that I go in to be in the presence of Jesus, that I close my eyes and I see him. I don't know exactly how that works, but I know Jesus. And I know he's got all the details worked out, because I am the way. I got the details. I got this covered. Trust me. Believe in me. And you don't have to fear death, because death is defeated. Death is just a transition. It just gets you out of this life into the next. Do we have a healthy view of that? Because I think if we can get our minds around that a little bit, we don't have to fear. Jesus takes away the fear of death. Satan wants you afraid. He wants you to fear death. He wants you to be terrified of it. Because if you are afraid, you will avoid risk at all cost. And you will fight to protect your life. You will fight to protect your comfort. You will fight to protect your reputation. Because this is it, man. This is where it all happens. So be afraid. Be very afraid, he says. Paul's view of life and death, they embolden him. Because he didn't have a fear, he didn't have a fear of death, which meant he had no fear of any man. He was emboldened. He knew that to live is Christ, and so Christ has me. I need fear no one. And he knows that if it's death, Christ has me, so I fear no circumstance. Paul, because of his healthy view of life and death, because he had no fear of death, because Jesus held his present and Jesus held his future, he had no fear. And he would do or say anything that Christ called him to do or say. And so again, we need to stop. Are we in that place? Are we in that position where we have no fear of anyone because Jesus? Because Jesus. He has today, he has tomorrow, he has my future, he has my present. And so we can be bold in Christ. Do you look forward to heaven? It's not really that you're afraid of it so much. You look forward to heaven, but it's like, yeah, but not yet. I've heard that a lot of times. It's like, look, I want to go to heaven, but not today. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not next week, really. Okay, can we try somewhere in the future when I get up into my 90s? That'd be good. Because, see, I got a lot of living to do. I got a family I want to see grow up. I got opportunities that I want to see. I want to see more sunsets and sunrises. I've got so much I want to see happen. I want to do. What shapes our attitude of life and death, where we say, I like heaven, I want heaven someday, but not yet? What makes it so that we get out of balance? So we can go to this fear of death on the one hand, and then we can go to this other very unhealthy place where it's like, I hate this life, and I want to go now. That's not a healthy place to be. It's not a healthy place, especially for a believer who says, I can't handle this anymore. I can't handle the weight of the world. I can't handle the frustrations. I can't handle this. And we get to this place where it's like, I just want it all to end. Let me say to you, either extreme is not healthy. This fear of death or this desire for death because you just want to check out of this life. Because at this point, depression, anxiety, all the things that we deal with, they are never a right reason to long for death. They are a right reason to long for Jesus. They're a right reason to look to Him who gives us hope through the pain. He never promised He would remove us from the pain. He never said that He would make it all go away. He said, though, I will carry you through this. I will get you through this, and I will make you stronger through the process, and I'll bring people around you who will love you. As a matter of fact, it is living for Christ that provides us the reason to live and the hope to get us through feelings of hopelessness. So I can't go any deeper on that right now, but if that's you, please don't be silent. Please come talk to me. Please grab somebody and just say, hey, I'm struggling with that thing that David talked about or that thing that you talked about. And I need hope because I don't feel it right now. I believe it in my head, but I don't feel it in my heart. That's really important that you get help because that's not where Jesus has for you to be. And He has and He will provide a way out of that. But are we torn? Maybe there's another possibility. Are we torn like Paul was? It's like, I don't have a fear of death. I'm kind of like, I want heaven, but not today. Or Paul is right there in the middle where we're torn. It's like, I want to be in both. I want to live here. I want to go because I want to minister for Christ and I want to be in His presence. Because I think that most of the time we're not torn. I think most of the time we want to go to heaven. When we die, we just don't want to die. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but we have to look at it. So on the one hand, given our understanding of eternal joy in heaven, and then this ongoing suffering in this fallen world, it seems like we would have a no-brainer. It would be like, look, if Jesus comes today, I'm ready to go. If Jesus calls me home, I'm ready to go. And I'm anticipating it. I'm keeping the lanterns prepared. I'm keeping my life prepared for when Jesus comes. But I think there are two things that fight against that. One is a limited understanding of heaven. And I think too many times we have this idea of clouds and wings and harps, right? Harps. Does anybody like harp music? Still a quick poll. Anybody like harp music? Okay, yeah. Okay. Do you want to hear that for eternity? Do you want to play a harp for eternity? Is that your idea of heaven? Got to tell you, it's not mine. Not where I am. I like instruments. Harp wouldn't be my choice if I got to listen to that for like iBuds or whatever in my ears and harp music all the time. No. That's not my view of heaven. I don't think it's an accurate view of heaven. I think we have often a misunderstanding of what it is and miss the fact that if we think of heaven, let's go back before the fall, where there are people and human beings who were doing things and work was established before the fall, not after. And you're like, okay, if heaven is work, no thanks. But it's a purified state. It's everything I believe that we love about life that Christ has given us, purified and perfected. So I think we have often a misunderstanding, a weak view of what heaven is. And I obviously can't unpack it now. And I can't give you a full picture anyway. And I think the other thing about it is that we have a limited experience with suffering. Oh, here we go again. Talking about suffering. David's up. He must be talking about suffering. And yet I talk about it a lot because Paul talks about it a lot. Jesus talks about it a lot. There is a lot in Scripture in the New Testament and especially and throughout the Old Testament we see it modeled. There's suffering that happens in this life. And the reason I think is because Paul knew that what suffering was in his own life. He knew it from experientially, but he also knew what it did for us. Suffering not only shapes us into the likeness of Jesus, which it does. Most of the time we learn most fully through our suffering. It's through the hard times that we learn the hard lessons of life that shape us. Usually when things are easy in our lives, we tend to learn a lot less, except how to play the latest Xbox game more efficiently. So there's a difference in what our suffering does and what our life of ease does for us. So it shapes us into the likeness of Jesus, but it also builds into us a longing for heaven. Some of you know what I'm talking about there. It builds within us a longing for heaven. It's why the older we get and the more moans and groans that come. Karen and I were talking about this today. She's like, you groaned when you got out of bed. Were you something wrong? I said, nope, just another day, right? It's just another day. You know, with each passing day, the groans get longer and louder. And that's what happens. As we get older, we understand as suffering comes on and our decaying bodies increase, it causes us to look forward to that day of redemption of our bodies, doesn't it? People in areas of intense persecution long for the day where Jesus will deliver them. I mean, they're living for Jesus today, but man, they've got reason to say, look, this suffering will be over someday. It's hard now. We are called to endure, but it will end. They have a better position and a better understanding of suffering than we do. Those who experience great loss look forward to the day that Jesus will return and wipe away every tear. On the other hand, again, people who have experienced little loss or hardship and do everything for our greatest level of comfort tend to think that this life really is something of a slice of heaven on earth, even if we know better. We're most susceptible to the deception that this really is our best life now. So why should we be motivated to leave it? So that's, I think, the condition. How do we remedy this? What can we do to fight against this? Some of the things I'm going to say they may sound like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. But I think that we need to. So I want to kind of insert here some possible remedies for you to consider on how to overcome this. And one is probably the easiest, the simplest, among the simplest, is to pray for the ability to see all you have in light of the surpassing value of knowing Jesus. That's what Paul did. He took inventory of his life and he said, look, I count all that as trash. We'll get to that later in Philippians, but I count it all as trash compared to the surpassing value of knowing Jesus. And so just praying, God, let me see things that way. Because everything has to be seen in light of how Christ is glorified through it. If Christ saturates all that we do and have, then those things tend to be seen more in their proper perspective, in the proper view. Let's take marriage, because that's one of the things that we often say, look, I don't really want to leave now because I'll leave my spouse and I want many more years with my spouse, and that's wonderful. If that's not you, come talk to me, because we probably have some problems there. But we have this desire not to leave our spouse. And if I view my marriage in isolation from the purpose of Christ, then I'm going to tend to view it out of balance or out of perspective. It's going to be elevated higher than it probably should be in my life. However, like in the case of Karen and myself, if we understand that marriage is designed as a reflection of Christ's love for us, and that it is only a shadow of the relationship that we're going to someday experience with Jesus, then we're going to enjoy our relationship with each other, but it's not going to be our highest treasure. See what I'm saying? We get it in balance. Another possible way is to read Scripture. Yeah, I harp on that too. It's like suffering in Scripture, suffering in Scripture. Yes, it is. Read Scripture, man. And I'm not saying specific. I know you don't have to go to the thesaurus and just come up with verses on heaven. Those are fine. Because the truth is, the more you engage Scripture generally, the more saturated with heaven you're going to become. The more you spend time in Scripture, the more saturated with heaven you will become. And also, just find good books that deal with the biblical principles. I mentioned one that I think is very helpful, the book Heaven by Randy Alcorn. That's a great book of taking what the Scripture says and then using, as he says, our sanctified imaginations to be able to see, to get a broader picture, maybe a clearer picture of what heaven might be like. So engage in growing in that area. And then here's another one that's really going to be unpopular. Voluntary suffering. Can I get a hand? Everybody's ready for that one. Ready? Voluntary suffering. Any volunteers? Suffer? No? None. Okay. What am I talking about? These are just a couple of examples. Spend some time engaged in a difficult mission. Some of you might need to be on the mission field. Some of you might need to be taking some sort of trip where you engage in, I'm not talking about evangelistic vacations, right? Where we go and we're just living in the lap of luxury and we're doing this in the name and glory of Jesus. Go to somewhere where you got to suffer, man, living in the dirt, eating bugs. I want to eat some bugs. Voluntary suffering where it's like, I'm going to lay aside my comfort to take the gospel somewhere. Maybe a possibility for somebody. Something the Bible often talks about is self-denial in the ways of fasting. That's a biblical thing. Giving up food for a little while. Just skip a lunch and experience the hunger pains and go, you know what, Lord, you are more valuable to me than food. I want to get a taste of what it means to live for you. Giving some of your possessions away. Give until it hurts. Sacrificial service, serving those who are experiencing deep hurt or suffering now. Just ways in which we need to fight against this desire for comfort all the time. Paul had a very balanced view, which is why his dilemma was a healthy one. And so we have to do these kind of things because we don't experience a whole lot of suffering. We are not being persecuted. We just don't have those things that work in our favor. And I say our favor in terms of the church. It is good for the church. Sit in it a while. Experience it a little bit. When you think about Paul, what he left behind personally was of no consequence other than the loss of opportunity to minister, which would involve more suffering and sacrifice in his life. Yet that's exactly what he did. He took the focus off of himself and he placed it squarely on his Christian brothers and sisters and the glory that Christ would receive through them. So his conclusion is in verse 25. Look at the first part of 25. He says, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you. I know that I'm going to stay here for now. I know that this is going to work out. And so given his extreme circumstances of suffering, we might be tempted when he makes that conclusion, knowing what he was going through, knowing all the beatings and the suffering to end like the night in the last crusade. Remember what did he say? He chose poorly. You got to think, what was he thinking? He had an opportunity to be in the presence of Jesus in light of his suffering. I mean, he was just beaten and he was shipwrecked and he had all this stuff going. He was like, I can be with Jesus now. And he goes, look, I know I'm going to stay. I know I'm going to stay here. Why would he do that? Why fight on to live this hard life? And the simple answer is he loved Jesus just that much. And the advance of the gospel was so high of his priority that he wanted Christ to be glorified. And it was more important that Christ be glorified than for him to be with Jesus face to face in that moment. And that's a pretty big deal if you really start thinking about that. What he turned down. When you long to see Christ so strongly but willing to fight on in this life so that you can spread the gospel more is the only way to truly be able to say, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. What are you able to say right now about life and death? What do you say about your own life as an exile? What do you say about your own life as a follower of Jesus, a child of the King? Is the gospel the motivational force behind your work, your possessions, your time, your family? To live for Christ is to focus on the self-sacrificing care of others. Back in 25, let's look at the rest. It said, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith. So he gives us the reason. You know I'm going to stay, and it's for your progress and joy in the faith. Paul chose in his heart to fight on for the sake of the Christians and the glory of Christ. He demonstrates a life completely sold out for the cause and the will of Christ. He really did consider himself a slave to Christ. That's the way he started off this letter. He really meant that. He understood that he was no longer his own, that he had no claims on his own in the present or in the future. He was totally all in. And so I want to give you this principle. To minister effectively is to minister selflessly. To minister effectively is to minister selflessly. This is why we are called to lay down our lives for our friends, and that there is no greater love than that. It's the love that reflects Christ, who did just that and even more. For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. If we are all ministers of the church, and Paul tells us in Ephesians 4 that we are, every one of us, you too, not just me, if that's who we are, then we are called to lay down our preferences. We are called to lay down our conveniences, even our very lives, out of love for one another. How much are you willing to suffer? How much are you willing even to be inconvenienced for the blessing of someone else? Ultimately, it's not even about your love for the church. It's all about Jesus. And how do we know this? Verse 26. He says, so that, I do this, so that because of my coming to you again, your boasting in Christ Jesus may abound. I am going to stay here. I want to stay here and minister so that your boasting in Christ may abound. So that everything that comes out of your mouth is like, Jesus did that. Jesus did that for us. Jesus is the one who gave me life. Jesus is the one that I live for. It's all about Jesus. Paul's coming to them would bring about more boasting in Jesus than his dying would at that point. He was not afraid to die. I think it's clear. Paul was not afraid to die. How and when he died was inconsequential to him because he looked past death to what was coming after that. And I think that's the key for you and I. As we get older, as things get harder, as we deal with threats from one thing or another, natural or unnatural, to be able to say, look, I don't know how that's going to happen, but I'm going to look past that because that is not the defining moment. That moment at which time you leave this earth and move into the presence of Jesus, that is not the consequential part. It's in the presence of Jesus that is so important, and it's in the presence of Jesus that we need to keep in our minds and hearts, and in the forefront of why we do everything is all Jesus. It's one of the reasons that communion, I believe, was given to us, to remind us about what Christ has done to death. He's killed it. He's destroyed death. He overcame it. He's the victor over it. And that we no longer live to ourselves. That we have been crucified with Christ. Christ lives in us, and the life that we now live in the body, we live by faith in the Son of God who loved us and gave himself up for us. It keeps the main thing in our lives, both now and for eternity. Let's pray.